Well, good afternoon. Here with Minister Toews to provide an update on efforts by the Government of Alberta to respond to the COVID-19 crisis. Later today, you'll be getting the daily update from Dr. Dina Henshaw, Chief of Medical Officer for Alberta. Our government has been focused not only on keeping Albertans safe in terms of their health, but dealing with the economic challenges that are posed, which are enormous and unprecedented. Many Albertans over the course of the past 2 weeks, tens of thousands of Albertans have been receiving layoff notices, businesses have been closing their doors, and people wonder whether those businesses will be reopening and whether those jobs will be coming back. We want those Albertans to understand that their provincial government will do everything within its power to ensure a future as we get through this very challenging time, created not only by the shutdown of the global economy coming from the pandemic, but also as a result of the unprecedented collapse in global energy prices. In particular, Alberta employers are facing a more challenging time than they have perhaps since the 1930s. And that is why our government has already taken a series of measures to both support households and employers through these challenging times. The last thing Albertans need to worry about right now is their finances, but their employment is being interrupted, and we know people are very anxious about their bank accounts, about their personal budgets, about their future. That's why we're continuing to build on our plan to support people through these unprecedented times. And so I have a series of additional measures that we are announcing today to help people stay afloat during this unprecedented economic downturn. Effective immediately, we are reversing the increase to the education property tax that was announced in Budget 2020. Things have changed drastically, and Albertans shouldn't have to worry about a higher property tax level. Therefore, we are maintaining 2019 property tax requisition amounts to lower the burden. This will save about $55 million for households and $32 million for businesses, totaling more than $87 million a year. Additionally, to help people working and assist Alberta employers, government will defer its portion of 6 months' worth of the education property tax on non-residential properties. These deferred amounts will be delayed until October of 2020. This means employers will only be responsible for 50% of the education property tax that they would have owed for this year. The deferred amounts will need to be repaid in subsequent years, and payment plans are being developed. We'll keep our options open if some form of additional targeted relief is necessary. And Minister Toews and I were on a call with the mayors of Calgary and Edmonton, as well as the president of the Alberta Urban Municipalities Association today. We understand that they'll be looking for ways that they can help as well with property tax assistance, but that will be up to them within their financial conditions. This deferral means that over the next 6 months, $458 million will remain with employers to help them pay employees and continue operating. We strongly encourage commercial landlords to pass these savings on to business tenants through reduced or deferred lease payments. We also, as I say, these savings are expected to be fully realized by Albertans and by Alberta employers. This is very important because as so many businesses are shut their doors this month in response to the public health crisis, we need those employers to know that there will be, we're not going to drain their bank accounts from payments. They will have more cash on hand to get through this challenging time so they can reopen their doors when the public health crisis has abated. We will also be deferring workers' compensation board premiums to allow private sector employers until the end of this year, affecting approximately 184,000 businesses. A deferral provides flexibility and support while employers maintain their WCB coverage and injured workers continue to receive the benefits and supports they need to work. This will not affect benefits for injured workers. It simply is a deferral on the premiums for the employers. And as a further step, small and medium-sized private sector employers will only have to pay for half of their 2020 Workers' Compensation Board premiums Government will take care of the other half. So for small and medium-sized businesses, we're cutting in half their WCB premiums this year, and for anything for the next several months, they won't have to make payments in any event. This means up to 183 small and medium-sized employers will have immediate financial relief as we deal with the pandemic. Employers who have already paid some of their 2020 WCB premiums will be refunded upon request or have the amount paid credited to their account. We're doing everything we can to support families and employers through this crisis and are continually reassessing the situation. This is in addition to the $1,146 biweekly emergency isolation payments, which will become available on My Alberta this week. People will be able to apply through alberta.ca. That is a bridge payment for folks who have to be in isolation until a similar federal program kicks in early April. It's also in addition to our deferral of business taxes this year, to our direction to the Alberta Treasury branches and to credit unions to provide for mortgage payment relief, as well as flexibility on commercial loan and personal loans. It's in addition to our elimination of AER fees for the balance of the year for energy producers, and our direction to gas and electricity utilities companies not to engage in collections for the next 3 months, giving people relief on the utilities payments. It's also in addition to our deferral on Alberta student loan payments, as well as the government will be covering the interest costs in the interim. And in addition to the $500,000 emergency supplement to the health budget, the $60 million civil society fund that is helping homeless shelters and charities serve the most vulnerable at this time. I have a couple of other messages before taking your questions. First of all, we have tens of thousands of snowbirds returning home from points south now at the end of March. We need to send a message to all of them that they must self-isolate at their homes immediately upon return to Alberta. This does not mean going to the grocery store. It does not mean going to the kennel to pick up your dog. It does not mean dropping your RV off at a service company to be serviced. It does not mean going and visiting the grandkids. It means one thing and one thing only. When you come into the country, whether you're driving north through Coots or you're landing in one of our airports, you must go directly and immediately to your home without stopping. And if you need supplies at home, if you need groceries or other critical supplies, you've got to call family, friends, or neighbors to help you out with that, or delivery services. We will not tolerate people coming in from overseas and then mixing with the general population. They would be threatening public health in Alberta. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. We have heard too many stories about people who think that this is the self-isolation rule for 14 days upon arrival is some kind of a vague general hint or suggestion. It is not. It is an absolute public health imperative, and we are prepared to, if necessary, use stronger legal tools to impose that obligation on people and stronger penalties if they violate that direction of our public health officer. And finally, we've been made aware of a number of scams and fraudulent operations targeting the vulnerable at this time of crisis. A number of people have called the AHS Health Link to report that they had received a call from someone claiming to be from Alberta Health Services who told them they had tested positive for COVID-19. The caller then requested the person's personal health care number, ID, and credit card information. In addition, cybersecurity incidents involving malware and fraudulent activities, including identity theft, are being reported across Alberta in the wake of COVID-19. Cybercriminals are sending emails and setting up fake websites designed to trick people into clicking links that install malicious software on their computers or capture credentials and other personal information. In light of these scams, Albertans should exercise caution when clicking on links or providing personal information to people or organizations that request that information about COVID if it's done so unsolicited. Such emails could be claiming to offer links to new information or to buy surgical masks or sanitizers. Beware of suspicious emails and web links, and always think twice before you click. If you want to go to where you get the authentic, verified, official government information on the COVID response, go to alberta.ca/COVID-19. I have to say, and then finally, once again, a message. There is no need for people to engage in hoarding. This morning I did a volunteer stint at the Hope Mission here in Edmonton, the homeless shelter and soup kitchen, and they told me that they've seen the number of people coming in to receive free meals has gone up by nearly 80% in the past 2 weeks, and yet they are struggling to get supplies because their suppliers are being stressed by the demand in the grocery stores and in the grocery system. This is outrageous. So, folks, the poorest amongst us are being hurt by people who are unnecessarily hoarding. So let me just say to those who are trying to exploit seniors and others during this time of a public health emergency, there must be a special place in hell for people like that. Just stop it. And it is completely un-Canadian. It is un-Albertan. It is unacceptable. It is illegal. And if we catch anybody who's engaged in these kinds of frauds or scams, I guarantee you the book will be thrown at them and they will face the full force of the law. If people are aware of any of these frauds or scams, please report them to the Government of Alberta by going to alberta.ca. Happy to take your questions.
Can I ask you two questions? One is, you're on a call tonight with the Prime Minister?
Yes, and the other premiers, yeah.
Yeah, what are your messages? What are your asks?
Our message will be that the Alberta Public Health authorities have done brilliant work. We're leading the country in testing and tracking and containment. Where we need federal support is in procuring supplementary equipment, because we don't know how long we're going to be in on this. We want to have as much personal protection equipment as possible, not only for our healthcare workers, but for everybody from police to and paramedics to workers at homeless shelters. That's one thing. So we are already working with the Government of Ontario on that, those extraordinary efforts at domestic procurement of equipment. But our message will also be that we need the federal government to step up to the plate in an unprecedented way to help keep this economy from a complete collapse. We have seen governments around the world. The United States is now on the brink of a $2 trillion economic rescue package. The British government, £330 billion, which would be the equivalent of about half a trillion Canadian dollars. And so we are going to need a federal action in that scale. We are doing our part based on our means as a provincial government, and we will do more. We are going to keep some of our powder dry until after the public health crisis and the economy begins to grow again, to surge demand through stimulative spending. But in particular, Alberta needs bold federal action to help ensure a future for Canada's largest industry, which is our energy industry. We also hope that they will act strongly to save the Canadian aviation sector, nearly 40% of which is based out of WestJet here, headquartered in Alberta. So those would be some of our higher profile requests. I can say Minister Tays has been in very frequent contact with his federal counterpart, Bill Morneau, on those and other issues.
You talked about the concerns over people not self-isolating, and you may ramp up punitive measures or enforcement measures. Can you elaborate a bit? What are you looking at? What would the tipping point be to bring those in?
Well, we'll be discussing that later today at our Emergency Management Committee of Cabinet. We do have the power to issue quarantine orders. I have directed that we further increase the Alberta Health presence at ports of entry, including we've already done that since last week at the Calgary and Edmonton airports and at the Coots border crossing. I've asked that we look at taking one step further and look at potentially issuing people with quarantine orders. So there is no ambiguity whatsoever of their obligation to go directly home and self-isolate for 14 days. There also there currently is a $100 fine for ignoring the current orders. We could significantly increase those penalties. I note that some other provinces have done that.
Lisa?
Mr. Premier, you talked about the government looking into what it can do to protect people from evictions. We're now 8 days away from April 1st. Is there any movement on that? Will the government ban evictions?
Well, first of all, there is a significant backlog on evictions, and we are considering a potential short-term stay on enforcement of evictions. But please note that most of the eviction orders that would currently be in the system predate the COVID crisis. Many of them would be renters who have not paid their rent for several months, or who have been engaged in criminal activity or vandalism or operating grow ops. We need to be, landlords need to be able to continue to protect the value of their property from bad tenants. At the same time, we call upon landlords to do the right thing, and wherever possible, extend rent relief during this difficult time to their tenants. It makes no economic sense for them to evict tenants for missing April rent, given the effective shutdown of our economy, because who else is going to fill those units? We also would ask any landlords who benefit from mortgage payment deferrals from the banks or other forms of relief like this provincial property tax deferral, we would ask them to pass those savings on to their tenants. We have a working group within the government. My principal secretary is on the phone right now with officials from Alberta Seniors and Housing, with municipalities, and with the rental sector to see if there are additional measures that we can take. We're also consulting with other provincial governments that are facing the same challenge. I would just point out that the notion of barring landlords from collecting rent over the next 2 or 3 months could lead to a total collapse of the stock of housing that's available to people. So we have to be very careful about how we deal with this, and that's why we're developing additional policies, and our cabinet will be meeting on those policy ideas later this week.
Fletcher?
Premier, on the tax relief being offered today, hearing from a number of businesses, and they're just beside themselves that there's zero revenue coming in right now. How, based on some of the models that you might have right now, how much difference will this make, do you think, for some of those people who are just saying, a little bit of a break here, a little bit of a break there probably doesn't make a difference? I've got no revenue.
So, exactly. So, look, first of all, we're doing everything we can within our control to stop taking money out of their bank accounts, just to keep them as liquid in terms of their cash as possible. So we've announced, obviously, the deferrals on Alberta business taxes, now on property taxes, on various kinds of fees and payments. And Minister Toews is looking at the entire range of provincial fees that are charged to see what we could suspend, defer, forgive. So we're doing everything we can to at least relieve that financial pressure from them. But clearly, bigger steps may be necessary that are beyond the fiscal power of the government of Alberta. I see that in Denmark, that the government has stepped in to offer payments of 80% of salary up to a certain cap for anybody who's had to leave work at this time, to keep a connection with the employer to help accelerate the restart when we get through this. And I think the U.S. Congress is looking at similar measures. So we're going to ask the federal government, especially for those small, the larger businesses that have big balance sheets and large lines of credit are generally better equipped to get through this crash in their revenues. But I'm really concerned about the SMEs. I was chatting with a friend of mine who runs a small restaurant on White Avenue in Strathcona yesterday. He said that, first of all, he hasn't gotten a dime out of his own business for over 3 months. Basically, the only income he gets is tips from waiting tables, and he owns the restaurant. And he's had to lay off 3/4 of his staff, and that was before this moment, where he's now having to shut down completely. And he doesn't know whether he'll be able to reopen. So we'll continue to work with the federal government on additional ideas about how we can ensure that those businesses survive this difficult period. Do you want to complement that, Travis?
Well, sure, Premier. And with respect to the Workers' Compensation Board premium deferral, again, the deferral in total is $1.1 billion, so it's a significant deferral that will drive liquidity or cash availability to businesses in the province. But for small and medium-sized businesses, again, as the Premier noted, we're going to be covering half of their annual premium. So that's approximately $350 million. And many of these businesses, small businesses, have already paid their premium, or their premium is coming due right now. So for those that have paid it, they will be getting, they can apply for a rebate, which will be cash back in their pockets. For those that have the bill sitting on their counter right now, they're relieved of paying it. So as the Premier noted, we're looking at everything we can do within our ability to provide cash relief and ultimate expense relief to those, especially small and medium-sized businesses.
Janet?
This is for the Premier. So we've seen other provinces or other provincial legislatures and the House of Commons.
Travis, give me a little more social distancing there, my friend.
Sure.
But it's supposed to be 2 meters, I think, is the rule.
That's exactly my question, which is about there's social distance measures that are being taken place in other legislatures that are sitting on an emergency basis. Is it still safe for the Alberta legislature to sit? And what specific measures are you taking to keep people apart from each other? We've seen some MLAs express concern.
Yes, we believe it's safe, and it's first of all, I think it's essential that the basic institutions of our society continue to function, and so I consulted with the Leader of the Opposition twice in the past 10 days on this point, and last Thursday afternoon we came to an understanding that we should keep the legislature in session and available to meet as necessary when important business arises. The government may be coming forward with additional legislative amendments to facilitate our emergency response, both on the public health and the economic side. And so we need the legislature to be able to do that. And I do think the legislature should be able to meet, at least on a limited basis at this difficult time, to review our entire government response to the COVID-19 crisis. We did discuss a protocol where we would keep less than 50 members in the legislature at any given time, so we can space out there. So to be clear, the public health direction is no organized events of more than 50 people. There was an exception made, obviously, for essential services, including the legislature. So we're developing, the two House leaders, the government and official opposition House leader, are developing an agreement so that both caucuses would keep the numbers down to less than 50 and space each other out in the legislature. So we're not concerned about the public health aspect of that. And basically the agreement is to operate on a limited as-needs basis in the next several weeks until this is over.
Just a follow-up question that's totally unrelated from my colleague about the Babylon app. So apparently there was some notice given to the Privacy Commissioner that this was going forward, but they're not going to be able to get around to reviewing the privacy concern around this app for something like a year. So what sort of steps did your government take to make sure that this app was in compliance with privacy law before you deployed it?
Well, I'd have to refer that very specific question to the Minister of Health, but I will say that the Babylon platform has been used in some of the most advanced public health care systems in the world for several years now, beginning with the National Health Service in the United Kingdom. And its first widespread application was next door in British Columbia, where it was authorized by the current New Democrat government of British Columbia. And so our understanding is that it is operated in full compliance with privacy laws in those jurisdictions. And generally, European privacy laws are even more rigorous than ours in Canada. So I don't, I think we have some confidence in this platform. And let me just say, there are a lot of misunderstandings floating online about the application. This is simply a 21st century version of calling up the doctor. These are secure. It's not the only application of its nature. There are several online applications for delivering health information with whom we are in discussions. The point is that telehealth is going to be part of the future of delivering health services, and I think it's more important now than ever during a pandemic when we want to minimize the number of patients who actually go into doctors' offices and emergency wards. That's why we wanted to accelerate the agreement with TELUS to offer Babylon Health. And let me be further clear that it is completely voluntary. You need patients who want that convenience. It's basically an online version of a trip to a walk-in clinic, and it is up to the physicians who want to sign a contract to participate in it. The only role for the government is to compensate the physicians based on the billing codes that exist. So, as I say, there's been, I understand, a very positive experience with this particular application in jurisdictions like the United Kingdom and British Columbia, and I anticipate that there will be other secure online health applications introduced into Alberta over the years to come.
Let's go to the phone operator. Can you put through the first caller, please?
Thank you. Yes, the first question is from Don Braid. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Premier, you'll be talking, I expect, with the Prime Minister this afternoon about the imposition of the Emergency Act, the Federal Emergency Act, which would change this whole game and presumably level out penalties and some protocols for handling self-isolation and so forth across the country. And my question is, do you in principle agree with the imposition of the Emergency Act? I presume after some discussion of what kinds of areas you'd expect not to be touched because you're doing them well or think you're doing them well. And I guess this would probably include closing borders of both land and air. Could you respond?
Sure, Don. We have not asked the federal government to declare that act. I don't see a pressing need for them to do so. I can certainly say here in Alberta, we have acted early and strongly to protect public health. I'm not sure what additional powers the federal government could do to assist us further in that regard. They have already passed an order in council closing the borders of Canada to foreign nationals with the exception of essential visitors from the United States. I think that was a responsible move that quite frankly should have happened a long time ago. I think the pressure for them to do so is coming in large part from the Northern Territories because their governments just frankly do not have the size or capacity to cope with a public health crisis of this nature. And the territories have a unique relationship with the federal government. They're not completely sovereign governments like the provincial governments of Canada. So we would, I'll listen to the conversation, but we don't see a pressing need for that here in Alberta. We would certainly ask the federal government, if they intend to do that, not to subordinate emergency management efforts by Alberta and other provincial governments. We don't need that level of confusion. And quite frankly, I think our officials here on the ground know best how to respond to the public health imperative than bureaucrats in Ottawa do. Obviously, we want a very high level of coordination across the country between provinces, the federal government, and territories, and we have that cooperation. Every day there is a conference call amongst the provincial public health officers, I believe chaired by the president of the Public Health Agency of Canada. And we as premiers through the Council of the Federation have already met by telephone several times in the past 2 weeks. I think our provincial health ministers and finance ministers have also been in discussion. So there is a great deal of cooperation across the country, but I certainly would not want to lose the ability for us to address the challenges here on a local level. Each province is a little bit unique or distinct in the nature of the challenge they are facing. We are landlocked. British Columbia is right next to a hotspot north of Seattle. Some East Coast provinces have very low levels of infection. So I think, we support coordination on a national scale, but at this point, we do not see a compelling need for the federal government to come in here and take over emergency management.
Do you have a follow-up, Don?
Yes, you do not yet have, we do not have in this province yet a public state of emergency. We have a public health emergency.
Correct.
State of emergency is a different thing, and I understand that would allow you to close borders on your own to Saskatchewan and British Columbia, obviously, and to the Americans. Do you have any thought of stepping that up?
That is a power that we have under the law. We have not seen a need to declare that kind of an emergency in Alberta. As you know, we have declared a public health emergency, primarily to allow us better to manage human resources in the health system, so we can assure that we have the personnel required when we hit the peak of the pandemic, excuse me. Don, our first choice is to likely deploy additional public health resources to the, first of all, to the airports and to the Coots border crossing. And, you know, I'm interested in what Nova Scotia did yesterday. They now have screening for people coming into Nova Scotia for their temperature, for example. So we're going to keep that option open, but right now we don't see a compelling need to do that.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Yes, thank you. The next question is from Chris Varco of the Calgary Herald. Please go ahead, Chris.
Premier, earlier in the conversation here, you said that you need to see from Ottawa them to step up in an unprecedented way to keep this economy from a complete collapse. What specific steps are you looking for them to institute, and when is reasonable to see it?
Well, first of all, we need to ensure the financial future of the largest industry in Canada, which is Alberta's oil and gas sector, which is under extreme financial stress right now. As you know, many of our best companies have seen a 90% reduction in their share value over the past 2 weeks, and every indication is that the Saudi-Russian price war could continue for as long as 18 months, in addition to which there is a precipitous decline in demand, resulting in Western Canada Select trading as low as $5 or $6 last week. I haven't checked today's prices. A little higher, but not much. And so the implications of this could be catastrophic for the largest subsector of the Canadian economy, the largest export industry, which is responsible for 250,000 direct jobs and hundreds of thousands of other indirect jobs. So Minister Toews has been working with his federal counterpart on that. My office has been in close touch with the Prime Minister's office, the Bank of Canada, the chartered banks, and our oil and gas producers in that respect. Secondly, we I think need to see some extraordinary action to save the Canadian aviation sector. That includes both our airlines and the airports themselves that are under extreme stress right now. But WestJet is a very important Alberta-based company, and I've made the point clear to the Prime Minister that any assistance that Air Canada might receive, WestJet must receive at least equal and similar forms of assistance. Thirdly, I think we need to see, of course, we already have seen some federal action on income support for people who suddenly find themselves unemployed, and we do appreciate last week's significant expansion of EI, and we are looking at what more we may need to fill in. But I think there's so much that needs to be done. One thing I would point to is helping small and medium-sized businesses get through this. And that may take some, I don't know, there's a number of different policy instruments where that could be done, a wage subsidy, expanded access to credit, a number of, perhaps rebates on federal taxes. There's a number of things that could be done, and we would be willing to, in principle, participate with the federal government on policies like that.
Do you have a follow-up, Chris?
Yeah, just going back to the issue of the EI payments, the top-up. You mentioned, I think, earlier that you expect to see them going out the door later this week. I guess I'm wondering whether you have the capacity to do that. How quickly will people actually expect to see money in their pockets who right now don't have any income at all?
Well, frankly, our concern is that the access to those expanded EI payments, including for the self-employed, could be weeks. The federal government has said applications will be available on April 1, for example, for the emergency isolation income replacement payments. But I used to be the minister responsible for employment and social development in Ottawa, and I know the system can be slow-moving. And as you know, they're facing a tsunami of applications. I think, what was the report we saw last week? Over 500,000 employment insurance applications. So I am concerned that it may take them 2 or 3 weeks, perhaps longer, to process those claims, in which case a lot of people are going to be at best living off of their credit cards. And that's why we've announced this emergency cash support for individuals who have had to give up their income in order to self-isolate. And we would just encourage the federal government to just move as quick as it can to get cash in people's pockets.
All right, one more from the phone. Operator, can you put through the next caller, please?
Yes, the next question is from Emma Graney of the Globe and Mail. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thanks for taking my question. I just want to go back to something you were saying earlier there, and you've mentioned this almost every press conference about the need to support the energy sector, and I'm wondering if you can elaborate a little on the state of talks with the federal government right now, specifically around orphan wells, which you've mentioned, and also some kind of TARP program, which is something else.
Well, thanks, Emma. Our first priority has been to work with the Government of Canada and the Business Development Bank to ensure access to the $10 billion of additional liquidity that the Government of Canada made available to businesses through BDC 2 weeks ago. And so my office and our Department of Finance have been working very closely to identify what the urgent cash and credit needs are in the Alberta energy sector. We think it's a lot larger than $10 billion. And that $10 billion was, by the way, for every industry across the whole country. So without getting, look, I can't get into too many details because there are conversations and negotiations ongoing, but let me just say that our assessment is that our producers need access to a backstop that would allow them to lower their look, some of them are having their lines of credit impaired. You're probably aware of a couple of good quality mid-size Alberta energy companies that have been denied access to credit by banks with which they had large credit facilities. That underscores what I'm talking about. And so whether it's through BDC or EDC, we want to make sure that they have access to that backstop so they can go to the banks and say, essentially, the Government of Canada is guaranteeing that. Then once we see, hopefully, an expanded version of that BDC backstop, we will then make an assessment as to whether additional measures are necessary. And I have floated this idea of a TARP-style program that is modeled on what happened in the United States in 2008, where essentially there would be a debt swap for a lower rate of interest. But we hope the federal government will, first of all, maximize the BDC backstop before we have to get there. Then on the question of the well reclamation and completion, as you know, we've given an additional loan to the Orphan Well Association. The real problem there is that current operators have billions of dollars of inactive wells that could be remediated, but that will not happen through the Orphan Well Association. That's only for orphaned wells. And so we had proposed to the Government of Canada tax incentives so that that would help oil and gas companies to do the reclamation work. Frankly, what we're hearing from Ottawa is they're not particularly interested in something like flow-through shares that have been proposed by the Petroleum Services Alliance of Canada. And so we are encouraging them to look at a more direct form of incentivizing well reclamation and completion. That would create good blue-collar jobs in the oil field service sector into work this spring as many people are being laid off.
You have a follow-up, Emma?
Yeah, I do. So would it be fair to say then that those more concrete actions are part of that, stimulus package or stimulus moves that your government might make further into the summer? Are you expecting these in the next couple of weeks?
Look, I would say that generally speaking, we believe that counter-cyclical stimulus measures will really only have an impact once we get past the shutdown phase of the pandemic. So as we move into the summer, hopefully we've seen the curve come way down on infections. We're able to relax social distancing measures and businesses get back to work. That would probably be the optimal time to begin a significant policy of countercyclical stimulus, with one exception. And I think the exception is outdoor construction-related jobs. I think by and large they can continue to operate, and there's a limited construction season. So we are prepared, in principle, to support those kinds of jobs. Right now, at the end of March, we're getting to spring breakup season, where the oil rigs basically become inactive, and a lot of crews are being laid off. We would love for them to be able to come back later in the spring to get to work on well reclamation.
All right, well, back to the floor for a question in French.
Is that fair to say, Travis?
Absolutely.
Oui, j'aurais deux questions en français. La première, vous avez annoncé une série de mesures d'allègement pour les petites et moyennes entreprises. Donc, quel est votre message à ces entreprises-là? C'est quoi votre stratégie pour les aider?
Tout d'abord, le gouvernement provincial fait tout que possible pour réduire les coûts imposés sur les petites entreprises, y compris aujourd'hui une sursis pour les paiements de workers' compensation et des impôts sur la propriété provinciale. Alors, on a fait toutes sortes d'autres mesures pour réduire le fardeau fiscal du gouvernement provincial sur les petites entreprises. Mais je sais que probablement ce n'est pas suffisant. Alors, c'est la raison pour laquelle nous espérons que le gouvernement fédéral aura un programme d'aide fiscale aux petites et moyennes entreprises qui sera annoncé peut-être dès que demain.
Et puis ma deuxième question, c'est par rapport aux mesures de sécurité, par rapport aux gens qui reviennent au Canada, par exemple les snowbirds. Vous avez dit qu'il faut encore insister. Pourriez-vous m'en parler en français?
Il y a dizaines de milliers des Albertains qui reviennent chez eux maintenant, les snowbirds et les autres, et nous soulignons qu'il y a une obligation légale d'aller directement chez eux, de ne pas aller à l'épicerie ou pour visiter la famille, parce que ça pose un risque aux santé publique si ces ressortissants circulent dans la population. Alors, si c'est nécessaire, on va imposer les ordres de quarantaine sur les ressortissants quand ils reviennent en Alberta, et nous exigeons, si vous venez chez eux, si vous arrivez à l'aéroport ou vous arrivez par auto des États-Unis, allez directement chez vous et demandez auprès de vos voisins, de votre famille, de amener les épiceries et tout ça. Mais c'est pas acceptable de circuler dans la population, parce que ça, c'est une menace aux santé publique. Thanks very much, folks. Sorry for my bad French today. I apologize.